Ross's story is one of psychological and verbal abuse and the damaging effects that cast a pattern of believing and living as a victim. To live your life entrenched in the sadness and suffering of your past is to carry the baggage of victimhood with you. This inner and often outer label that you have given yourself imparts confusion and self-doubt. Its mark is one of unworthiness and feeling undeserving of love. You struggle with this because at your core, you know that you are worthy. It is just that it can be difficult to find and feel evidence for this. The damage inflicted by a repetitive cycle of the trauma of abuse is not entirely known until some later time in our life, in which we find ourselves reliving the pattern, the experience, the rhythm, quite innocently. In last Sunday's episode, titled "The Voice of Trauma," I spoke about naming the trauma that you have suffered and of being clear about how you may also have contributed or caused another to suffer, whether from your unkind or hurtful words, or any destructive actions that were the result of your lack of self-control and the lashing out of hurt and anger that results in a traumatic event that can never be retracted. If you have been struggling silently or publicly with a relationship in which you continue to receive the abuse of another in any form, please have a listen to the episode. I will share a link here for you. You reclaim your power when you first give a voice to your experience. No one can know the extent of what you experienced until you name it. From here, you will then decide how you shall remove yourself from the cycle of abuse. As I share Ross's story here, you can see how easily we can all experience suffering and pain from the harmful behavior of others who are allowed to continue the cycle of abuse. Allowed because we continue in the same patterns with them, hopeful, optimistic, sometimes in denial, rather than removing ourselves into safety. You cannot change or stop another person from being abusive, no matter how much you care and how kind and determined your efforts may be. Another person can only change if they decide. This is the human construct of free will choice that we have all been given. You can change how you choose to continue or disengage in a situation where the cycle of abuse continues. You can also take the positive action to no longer place yourself in a position where you are the recipient of emotional, physical, verbal, or sexual abuse and the trauma it yields. There is no power in abuse. Hello, this is Dorothy. In addition to the weekly format of this podcast, in which I offer practical and spiritual wisdom that I lovingly share with you each Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I am so excited to offer a second format of amazing content. It's called Ask Dorothy. These episodes reveal the inner workings of what really happens inside a session of therapy and life coaching with me. Here I dive into the richness of content that each client brings to our sessions and how we best navigate what insights, teachings, solutions, and of course, healing and wholeness abounds. I know that listening will offer you much wisdom and guidance in the ways that bring to life what you need, and also how to implement the best practices and teachings that I share to honor all of what you seek and all of what you are becoming. In each of the Ask Dorothy episodes, you will also hear my candid observations and commentary, and the process for how we arrive in a place of harmony, relief, clarity, understanding, and the true change that happens in each and every session because of a client's willingness to grow, to evolve, to move beyond their comfort zone and into the revelation of what they already know, what they learn to be capable of, and what they desire most for their life. My job is always to support a client's progress and to provide the right tools and best therapeutic practices to ensure that each client will reach their goals, including to be all that they wish to become. I hope you'll enjoy the Ask Dorothy series as an opportunity to have the knowledge and insight of what we can do together. If you have a question that needs my love and helpful guidance, please write to me. All right, so let's jump into this episode and Ask Dorothy. The nature of abuse that begins in childhood can be concealed with the cursory titles of father and mother, of caregiver, family member, elder, sibling, and family friend. It becomes confusing when a parent or another caregiver is the abuser, because this person is supposed to be a protector of our safety and a nurturer of our care and love. As you are listening, this episode will help define your experience. Having a name for the behavior that you are the recipient of will give you the ability to better understand why this relationship has been so damaging and why you have continued to suffer. I also want for you to reclaim your power, to give yourself permission, even now, to step away, to walk away, to forever change the boundaries that you uphold so that you can begin to feel safe, to feel relief, and to no longer fault yourself for a relationship that is inconsistent, untrustworthy, uncomfortable, and unsafe. To name the behavior that has perpetuated the struggle that you have experienced in aiming to have a healthy relationship now offers you insight and further understanding. The person has continued to be abusive, well hidden under the guise of other labels, and in their continual requests for forgiveness and starting over that have made it possible for the pattern of this unacceptable behavior to continue. Abuse is abuse. If someone continues to mistreat you as a result of their inability to self-regulate their emotions, to check their actions, to be respectful and kind, and if they are inappropriate in any way that causes you to feel uncomfortable, unsafe, or threatened, you need to give this a name, because in illuminating this harmful behavior, you can then make a conscious choice for how you will extricate yourself from situations in which the behavior may again repeat. As a human being, it is our nature to want to receive love and approval. This is why it becomes confusing when a caregiver is repeatedly hurtful and abusive, whether in their actions or words or both. The messages that we learn, that we adopt as our own, become the incessant stories of our mind. Not only do we learn through direct observation of the behavior modeled to us, we also learn through repetition as messages of unkindness, disrespect, aggression, and abuse, demonstrated by those who ought to be setting a standard of what is kindness and unconditional love as the normalcy of what is acceptable. I am not speaking of a parent that loses their patience infrequently, rather, a parent or caregiver who is unable to model self-control. Instead, they continue to allow their irreverent thoughts and uncontrolled emotions to drive their actions, deliberately and without self-intervention and self-regulation. We also learn from a young age how to quietly avoid conflict and unpleasant situations because we fear the onslaught of a negative reaction that is far beyond what is considered appropriate. When you change your inner and outer dialogue to, I no longer accept abusive behavior, and if you believe in your power to speak up, to call out the inappropriate words and actions, even if only first to yourself, and without a need to fix anything in another person, because this is not yours to fix. You have begun to stop the cycle. The other person may not ever change, yet you have stopped condoning what is wrong. You can forgive, and you no longer let the behavior be disregarded, or worse, allowable by not speaking to it. As the eldest child of 4, my client Ross was the child that received the most severe abuse from his father. Parents do treat their children differently, in part because each child is different. Yet, if a parent withholds love or worse, punishes because one child is not following a path or a set of orders that they demand, this is diminishing and it is abusive. In Ross's case, the inner humiliation that grew with each instance of abuse as withholding of love and belittling words spoken by his father became the outward rejection of himself as seen through his own eyes. I believe that we enter the world full of goodness and love and of a need for self-protection and self-preservation. If we are mistreated or abused, we learn to close our heart energy. We learn to withdraw from the world, from others, and from our own incredible light, because we have been shown that love and kindness are not easily given by all. Think about this for a moment. If you cannot trust that your parents or any other caregivers will consistently love, support, uplift, and encourage you, you begin to doubt your worthiness and your ability to deserve love simply by being who you are. Next, I would like to share with you some of Ross's own words in describing his life story. They are meant to illuminate a view of what life was like from his eyes. I was kicked out of the family home because my dad didn't want me to influence my siblings negatively and be an example for them to rebel and not want to be doctors. My dad, a doctor in his home country, told my mom to go visit her ill brother abroad, and as soon as she left, he called the police and asked them to remove me from the house. At the time, my dad had access to my savings. He took it all, leaving me with no money to live or eat. I was homeless for a week until I was able to get a place at a communal motel. This all happened when I was already depressed because I was dumped by my first girlfriend. Welfare helped me pay for my law school application. Ross did become a lawyer. He did so with the desire to be successful, to be independently employed, and to be respected. As much as he was ashamed and angered with how his father mistreated and abused his mother, and how he himself was shown rejection and disdain. Ross found within himself an insatiable desire to want to be loved and approved of by his father. We continue to look for love and approval from the people that have so greatly impacted our life because inherently we are conditioned to love our caregivers. We look for their approval and love to show us that we are worthy of being loved and that we are valuable and deserving of positive attention and approval. It would be only after years, decades of attempting to have a pleasant relationship with his father that Ross would learn that this would never be possible. Recognize the difference between hoping that someone will treat you with consistent love and kindness, and that they will be wholly honest and truthful, and the ever so present balance of realizing what is true, and that you must first accept others as they are. It is not possible to change another person, no matter how much you hope for this or make the efforts towards this. For as long as someone has resigned themselves to be as they are, nothing is changing, unless it is from you. This is what is meant by true acceptance. Acceptance is not the approval of someone's abusive behavior. Rather, acceptance is allowing the person to be who they are. This frees you to no longer expend your effort and energy in a direction that continues to yield the replaying of old patterns, many of which set you up for continuing to feel hurt, disappointment, and suffering because of another person's repeated behavior. When you allow someone to be who they are, you free yourself to then choose what parameters you will hold for having any form of relationship with them. And if you choose this, this is how you liberate yourself from the anguish and the cycle of abuse. For Ross and for any of you who have grown up receiving abuse, which is behavior that causes psychological, emotional, sexual, physical, and/or cognitive harm, you will be able to release, to shed your suffering the moment that you decide that you already hold within you all of the love, encouragement, and power to give yourself what you need to heal, and to never rely on someone else for this. When someone's effort to be kind is fleeting and marked with self-interest rather than driven by true remorse and proven change, it is because they are not willing to be wholly self-honest and truthful. This person has continued to convince themselves that they do not need to change, or that change is not possible. This is how someone allows their ego to justify and rationalize their bad behavior. The danger of this, of course, is that it can draw you in to continue in the same damaging cycle and suffering. It's important to give permission to yourself to no longer accept nor tolerate abuse. When someone finds reasons and excuses to continue to be abusive in any form, to justify their words and actions, to look to you for change, to make concessions in order to help them feel better, they are simply not ready. They may never be ready to look at themselves with whole honesty. Unfortunately, nothing will change until you step back and, like Ross did, no longer look for or rely on another for approval, for consistency, for unconditional love, and the kind of relationship that you would like to have. The most important thing that you can do to end the cycle of abuse is to name it and then to choose that you will no longer be a part of the cycle. It speaks to how damaging it is for you to expect something different in a relationship where the other person continues to behave the same. It must be you that redefines your relationship with the person who is abusive. For some, this means very limited contact and the true acceptance that the relationship will not be what you would like because the other person's behavior is inconsistent, and you no longer wish to receive blame, hostility, untruthful words, inauthentic actions, nor to feel hurt and suffering. I also want to convey how important it is as an adult to first work on the person that you are before you set out to have a family. If you do not first heal your own wounds, then you will continue to witness your dark side, to behold of it to show up in your words and actions with your children and others, because you have not yet fixed this. I understand the desire of someone to want to be a parent, and I have also witnessed on far too many occasions children who have been mistreated. The pattern of mistrust and the cycle of abuse then continues. Sadly, I would suggest that each one of us has experienced a lack of love and mistreatment. If you take the time to do the inner work that allows you to live out of your heart and with the utmost kindness and love, then you will approach all situations in a way in which you choose to share of your light. And if you still wonder what inner work you need to complete, simply take a look at the unpleasant patterns that continue to reoccur in your most formative relationships. These will be the well-informed cues for you to look inward at yourself and at what actions have contributed or caused the damage and suffering that you and another have experienced. You will then know where to begin. Ross was not abusive to his partner nor his children, and yet he experienced the cycle of abuse as a victim again as he articled for and then later worked as an associate with his employer, a seasoned lawyer who later left the firm and became a judge. Ross suffered in the way in which he was treated by his former boss and the only real male mentor he had. At first, Ross wanted to emulate Paul. He wanted to experience the power and respect that Paul seemed to have, until Ross became the victim of Paul's sexual slurs and inappropriate touching. Ross admitted that he had no understanding of what it meant to experience sexual harassment and a poisoned work environment, as Paul groomed Ross in the hopes that he would engage in sexual acts with him. Ross kept silent. He told no one except his wife until well after Paul left the firm that Paul started and that Ross would continue to own as a managing partner. This true story has yet one more layer, one more echelon of verity that ties back to what can happen when we continue to be exposed to abuse as normative. Ross did not take a stand to stop his boss whenever Paul would make sexual comments about him or about men in Ross's presence. Sometimes there would be others privy to the inappropriate gestures and behavior that was directed toward Ross, and yet no one said a word. It was as if the underlying message was that, whilst inappropriate, no one dared to confront the sexual harassment. Ross was sexually victimized for years, and those who worked closely with Paul knew this. The repeated disparaging and critical messages that we receive in childhood shape our view of ourselves and the inner dialogue that we then repeat, even when, at our core, we know we are not this. It is the pattern of repetition that casts a shadow on how we see ourselves and how we live. At the peak of his career at age 40, Ross found himself in a position where he was sexually inappropriate to two of his articling students. Ross was not looking to leave his marriage and abandon his pregnant wife, yet the callous and evident ways in which he behaved towards the two young women whom he would later confess that he had the utmost respect for were now the victims of Ross's unwanted flirtations and comments that again created a poisoned work environment and the deplorable behavior of sexual harassment. I share Ross's story to illustrate how we all need to be mindful, thoughtful, self-aware of the habits of our behavior and the inner voice of our conscience that reminds us when we are mistreating another. Ross explained to me in his humility and shame that he knew what he was doing was wrong. We all have an inner compass, a conscience, that guides and directs us in all moments. You always know when you are doing something that is wrong, unjust, unethical. Should you do something so wrong? Should you initially ignore your conscience? The question is, are you paying enough attention to make the correction right away and to not allow yourself to continue in the undesirable behavior? For whatever unwanted and unpleasant experiences you have faced, you are also in the same moment precisely responsible for whether you choose to behave in the same way. Ross did not make the connection at the time of his actions that he was the perpetrator, that he was emulating the same behavior that was done to him. At first, Ross did not understand why he behaved inappropriately with these two women, who stepped forward with formal complaints. It was not until Ross began to put all of the pieces of his life together, and as he finally spoke with me of the trauma of the years of sexual harassment that he was victim to, that he began to understand, knowing it was wrong and entirely inappropriate, how he allowed himself to behave in such a deplorable way. Why do victims become perpetrators? Why did Ross sexually harass and disrespect two members of his firm in a similar way to what he himself endured? When you act without thinking through the consequences of your behavior, when you react in ways that have been repeatedly shown and taught to you, rather than to act out of a conscious and deliberate knowing of right and wrong, it is entirely possible that you can repeat a pattern that is unwanted, damaging, and abusive. The simple example of how so many of us sleepwalk through life is the distractions of our devices that we are drawn toward and compelled to interact with for so many of our waking moments. The antidote for this, of course, is mindfulness and living awake and aware, and of choosing to be present, to witness and engage in life in the moments of now. And of course, to constantly be self-observing and self-aware. Have you done this? Have you yelled at your child or said something hurtful almost instinctively, and later, in a moment of self-reflection, realized that you had behaved in a similar way to one of your caregivers? Do you react based on a pattern of behavior that you have witnessed and learned, and one that has likely been repetitive? This is not to say that you will always behave as your parents and other caregivers have shown you. Ross made the conscious decision to never belittle and diminish his children with the hurtful and disparaging words and conduct that he received. Yet, he did not refrain from the same unwanted and harassing behavior of his former boss, in large part because he did not first give voice to the abuse he received. This traumatic, repetitive cycle that he lived for nearly a decade. You must be willing to name the abuse, to acknowledge it, to identify what it is so that you can then decide it is not how you will choose to be, that you will not repeat what has been done and shown to you because in your free will choice, this is wrong. It is unkind, disrespectful, and deplorable. It is not how you wish to live your life. Knowing this is how you prevent the pattern, how you stop the cycle, how you live free, to be remarkable, to be proud, to live as your best self. This is how you heal from the damage you have suffered. You heal first as you name the abuse, and then as you choose to no longer live it. I recognize that this is a new way of thinking about what has caused you to suffer. You may, in your journey of healing, also wish to speak with someone who can help you reclaim your power. If you would like my help as you stop the cycle of abuse and to what you have suffered, please reach out to me. Let me help. And finally, the name of my client has been changed to maintain confidentiality. Thank you so much for listening. Sending you great love. This is Dorothy. Namaste. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode of the Wisdom Podcast. To hear more, please check out the other episodes right here. And I'd love for you to subscribe and share your feedback on this or any episode with me. And then join me at dorothyratusny.com, where you'll find the wisdom blog, the inspiration for this podcast, the latest online courses that I teach, my YouTube videos, and the Wisdom Archives, which are an extensive library of guided meditations, mindfulness musings, spiritual teachings, and best therapeutic practices for your whole being, and to nourish and heal your life, plus many other special offerings of love. Please also visit me on social media and say hello. Allow yourself to go within, to access your inner wisdom, and to live this. Awaken your authentic power, live your truth, and be love. Thank you. This is Dorothy.